tell me the Boston Celtics have traded All-NBA star 2024 Finals MVP Jaylen Brown to the Philadelphia 76ers for Paul George, 2 first-round picks.
The Boston Celtics just did the unthinkable. They traded Jaylen Brown. And now, for the first time, the real reason why has finally been revealed. We are talking about the 2024 Finals MVP, the player who carried this franchise through an entire season without Jason Tatum, the man who just finished 6th in MVP voting after averaging 28.7 points, 6.9 rebounds, and 5.1 assists per game. Gone. Sent to Philadelphia, the same team that just eliminated Boston in the first round of the playoffs 2 months ago. If you think this is just another routine off-season shakeup, think again. According to ESPN's Shams Charania, who first reported and confirmed the deal on the night of July 1, 2026, this was not a spontaneous decision made in a vacuum. This was the conclusion of something that had been building for a very long time. There was locker room frustration. There was a front office strategy. There was a financial crisis buried inside a collective bargaining agreement that made running this roster nearly impossible. There was social media drama that turned private tension into very public theater. There was a pursuit of Giannis Antetokounmpo that collapsed at the last second and left the Celtics scrambling. And there was a relationship between a player and his franchise that had quietly deteriorated long before the rest of the world was allowed to see it. The signs were all there. Tonight, we are breaking down the entire story from beginning to end, every layer, every detail, every piece of evidence that explains how and why one of the most celebrated partnerships in recent NBA history came to this. This is not just a trade. This is the end of an era, and you need to hear all of it. But before we get into what broke this apart, we need to establish exactly what Boston just walked away from, because this is the part most people are not giving enough attention to. The national conversation jumped immediately to what Philadelphia gets, what the picks are worth, whether Paul George can stay healthy. All of that matters, but before any of that analysis lands properly, you have to truly understand who Jaylen Brown was inside that organization and what he meant to this franchise. Because once you see the full scope of what he built across 10 seasons in Celtic green, the decision to move him becomes not just surprising, but genuinely stunning. Brown was selected 3rd overall in the 2016 NBA Draft out of California. He was raw, athletic, highly intelligent, and immediately identified as someone with the physical profile of a future star, but also as a player who would need time and development before reaching his ceiling. He did not arrive in Boston as a finished product. His first few seasons were defined more by flashes of brilliance than consistent dominance. But gradually, methodically, season by season, he transformed himself into something special. By his 4th year in the league, he was averaging over 20 points per game. By his 6th, he was an all-star. By his 8th, he had become one of the most respected two-way wings in professional basketball, a player who could shut down elite perimeter scorers on one end and create his own offense at multiple levels on the other. He earned multiple All-NBA selections throughout his career. He developed a reputation for elite perimeter defense, capable of guarding positions 1 through 4 with equal effectiveness. He was explosive in transition, reliable in the mid-range, and had developed into a legitimate three-point threat and an increasingly capable playmaker. And then, in June of 2024, after years of heartbreak and near misses and finals appearances that fell just short, Jaylen Brown reached the absolute pinnacle. The Boston Celtics defeated the Dallas Mavericks in 5 games to claim their 18th NBA championship. Brown averaged 26 points per game in the series. He was named Finals MVP. He was the best player on the best team in basketball. For one shining, earned, undeniable moment, everything aligned perfectly. And then, slowly, quietly, and then, all at once, it started to come apart. Here is how we actually got to this point, and this is where things get very interesting. After the 2024 championship, Boston looked like a dynasty in the making. Brad Stevens had assembled one of the deepest and most versatile rosters in the league, built deliberately and patiently around the partnership between Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, two wings who had developed together inside this organization from teenagers into genuine franchise cornerstones. The Celtics had been to the Eastern Conference Finals 6 times with this core. They had reached the NBA Finals twice. They had won it all. Analysts across the sport were pointing to this team as the foundation of something potentially generational. The duo was celebrated as one of the most complementary pairings in modern era. Two elite scorers, two capable defenders, two players versatile enough to guard multiple positions and create offense in different ways. The blueprint was praised. The future looked bright. And then, in the spring of 2025, during Boston's title defense, Jason Tatum suffered a torn Achilles tendon, one of the most devastating injuries a basketball player can experience. Gone for the majority of the 2025-26 season. And just like that, the entire landscape shifted. What Brown did in response to that adversity is what makes this trade so genuinely difficult to rationalize from a basketball perspective. He carried this franchise alone through an entire season. 28.7 points per game, 6.9 rebounds, and 5.1 assists per game, a career high that reflected his evolution as a complete playmaker. He led the Celtics to a 56-26 record and the second seed in the Eastern Conference. He finished 6th in the regular season MVP voting. He earned All-NBA second-team honors. By every meaningful statistical measure, Jaylen Brown was playing the best basketball of his career at 29 years old.
And here is the argument that many fans and analysts were already making loudly before this trade dropped. That Brown had quietly become the best player on this team. Not Tatum. Brown. Tatum was injured, yes, but even setting that aside, what Brown showed this season was something different. He was the engine, the closer, the creator, and the defender all at once. His usage rate of 36.2% ranked second among all qualified players in the entire league. He was asked to do more, and he did more, not just adequately, but brilliantly. Multiple analysts pointed to this season as proof that Brown had separated himself as Boston's most complete and most indispensable player. He was not just surviving without his co-star, he was thriving in a way that made some people genuinely question whether Tatum was ever the right number 1 in the first place. Boston had the second seed in the East with Tatum sidelined. That does not happen without a top 5 player carrying the full load, and the Celtics just traded that player. But here is the thing about carrying a franchise all season. When the playoffs arrive and the limitations of the roster get exposed under maximum pressure, individual brilliance alone cannot always carry you through. The Celtics met Philadelphia in the first round. They built a 3-1 series lead and then collapsed completely. 3 consecutive losses, a Game 7 at TD Garden, 109-100. Season over. First round exit. The first time in franchise history the Celtics blew a 3-1 series lead. And what happened in the aftermath cracked something open between Brown and the organization that could not be quietly sealed back up. Less than 24 hours after elimination, Brown went live on Twitch. He streamed for 70 minutes and did not hold back. He accused the officiating throughout the series of carrying a deliberate agenda against him specifically, pointing to the fact that he had led all playoff players in offensive fouls with 10, twice as many as the runner-up, and arguing that referees had been instructed to call a specific move of his regardless of the game situation. He said in plain language that they clearly had an agenda. The NBA fined him $50,000 for public criticism of officiating. He streamed the following week again, said he might get fined another $50,000 for what he was about to say, called Joel Embiid a flopper, and praised Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, and KJ Edey for how efficiently they had broken the Celtics down. And then he said something that cut deeper than any officiating criticism ever could. He called this season, the season they were eliminated in the first round, the season they blew a 3-1 lead, his favorite year of his entire basketball career. Not 2024, not the championship year, not the Finals MVP. This one, the one where Tatum was gone and Brown was the center of everything. Think carefully about what that actually says. The best individual season of his career, the most freedom, the most responsibility, the most control, and it ended in a first-round exit. And he still called it his favorite. That told the organization something very specific about what Jaylen Brown actually wanted out of his career. But what happened next is what most people are pointing to as the moment this relationship truly and irreparably broke. And it did not happen on a basketball court. It happened online, and it is arguably one of the primary reasons the Celtics ultimately decided to move on. In the weeks following elimination, a fan left a comment beneath one of Brown's Instagram posts saying that as someone who could not stand the Celtics, he hoped the organization would do right by Brown by trading him to a city that actually respected him. Jaylen Brown liked that comment. Let that sit for a moment. A player coming off the best statistical season of his career, a player who had just scored 33 points in Game 7, a player who had never once publicly requested a trade. He liked a comment wishing he would be traded away from the organization he had spent his entire career building. That is not an accident. That is a message. Players at Brown's level understand exactly what social media engagement communicates, and he chose to send that signal deliberately and openly. He then went even further. He reposted a lengthy video created by another content creator, a video that argued Brown had been systematically undervalued inside the Celtics organization, that pointed to his exclusion from the 2024 United States Olympic roster despite roster spots opening up due to injuries, and that detailed the documented history of Boston attempting to trade him multiple times throughout his career, including during the 2022 Kevin Durant pursuit. He did not record it, he did not write it, he shared it, and sharing it was loud enough. Brown also posted on social media that no player had accumulated more combined regular season and playoff wins than him since entering the league, over 523 victories. He was right about the number, but the timing and framing of that post told you everything about the emotional place he was in. He was keeping score. He was making his case publicly, and the Celtics were watching every single move. Sources told ESPN that by the time the deal with Philadelphia was finalized, Boston was described as full-blown shopping Brown around the league. Brown never formally requested a trade, but the trust between both sides had eroded to the point where the question was no longer whether they would move on from each other. It was only a matter of when and for what. Now, here's the structural layer that explains everything else, the one hiding inside spreadsheets and CBA documents, but ultimately driving every decision the Celtics made this offseason. The NBA's 2023 collective bargaining agreement introduced the second apron, a threshold set at $21 million above the luxury tax line. Cross it, and the restrictions become severe. No taxpayer mid-level exception, no buyout signings, no cash in trades, no first-round picks traded more than 6 years out, and no taking back more salary than you send out in any trade. That last restriction alone makes it impossible to acquire meaningful talent through the trade market.
The Celtics have been living with this reality for 2 years. Running back the 2024 championship roster would have cost over $500 million in combined salaries and repeated tax penalties. $500 million. Boston had already traded Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis for financial relief just to get under the second apron the prior offseason. And even after all of that, having both Tatum and Brown on simultaneous Supermax contracts, Brown earning $57 million in 2026-27, $61 million the year after, and $64.9 million the year after that, made assembling a championship-caliber supporting cast a mathematical impossibility. Two Supermax wings in a second apron world are not a dynasty. It is a trap, and Brad Stevens could see it clearly. And then came the moment that changed the entire trajectory of this offseason. Giannis Antetokounmpo became available. Multiple outlets reported that the Celtics had entered serious negotiations with the Milwaukee Bucks about acquiring the two-time MVP. The proposed framework included Jaylen Brown and two unprotected first-round picks heading to Milwaukee. Boston was reportedly ready to pull the trigger. The organization had internally committed to moving Brown as part of that package. The concept of a Tatum-Giannis pairing, two elite superstars, with Giannis operating as a clear number two without threatening Tatum's franchise status, was compelling enough to justify parting with the player who had just won them a championship. This was not idle speculation. This was a real offer and a real organizational commitment to moving in a new direction. But Milwaukee chose differently. Giannis went to Miami. And just like that, the Celtics were left in one of the most uncomfortable positions imaginable. They had publicly committed to moving Brown. His name had been attached to trade packages in national reporting. The relationship was visibly strained, and now he was still on the roster with no superstar coming back in return. That is when Philadelphia stepped forward, and the deal came together fast. ESPN's Shams Charania confirmed the trade on the night of July 26, 2026. Jaylen Brown to Philadelphia. In return, Boston receives Paul George, a 2028 first-round pick that could convert to a more favorable swap, a 2031 unprotected first-round pick, a 2028 second-round pick representing the most favorable selection from Golden State, Oklahoma City, or Milwaukee, and a 2032 second-round pick representing the most favorable selection from Washington, Portland, or Phoenix. The basketball world stopped. Social media collapsed. Every major outlet scrambled to grade and react within hours. DraftKings moved Philadelphia's odds to win the NBA Finals from 60-1 all the way down to 22-1 overnight. The Celtics saw their own finals odds move from 7-1 to 10-1. Podcast hosts questioned the logic across the board. Television analysts on ESPN and TNT debated loudly whether Boston had just made the worst trade of the decade. Multiple players and former players took to social media to express genuine disbelief. CBS Sports graded the deal an A+ for Philadelphia and labeled Boston's decision baffling. ESPN's own analysis concluded the trade made the Celtics demonstrably worse and lowered their championship ceiling, even accounting for Tatum's eventual return. The 76ers, meanwhile, were being hailed as the biggest winners of an already blockbuster offseason that had seen Giannis move to Miami, Kawhi Leonard and Brandon Ingram swap franchises, and Ja Morant get traded to Portland. And the central question dominating every single conversation was the same relentless one. Why would you trade a player like this? Why now? Why him? Here is where the pure basketball argument comes in, and it is a strong one. Brown was not declining, he was ascending. He had never missed more than 19 games in a single season, remarkable durability for a player carrying the physical demands of his style. He was an elite two-way presence, capable of guarding positions 1 through 4 on defense and creating offense at every level. He was becoming an increasingly capable playmaker, as his career-high assist numbers this season demonstrated. He was reliable in the biggest moments. In 7 playoff games against Philadelphia, the series that ended his Celtic career, he averaged 25.7 points, 5.7 rebounds, and 3.3 assists. In Game 7 itself, he scored 33 points with 9 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 blocks in a losing effort. That is not a player you move. That is a player you restructure everything else around. The fact that Boston moved him anyway tells you that what was happening away from the basketball court had become impossible to separate from the basketball decisions, because in the modern NBA, it never really can be. But here's what the broader public reaction is still not fully accounting for. The Celtics didn't just make this move because the numbers stopped working. They made it because the relationship stopped working, and those two things compounded each other in ways that made staying together more costly than breaking apart. Brown liked the comment, wishing he would be traded. He called a painful elimination season his favorite year of his career. He went live on Twitch twice and said things that cost him $50,000 and generated national headlines. And the Celtics, at the same time, were internally shopping him to every team in the league, using his name in Giannis trade packages and signaling loudly that they were open to moving on. When both sides are quietly sending those signals simultaneously, the relationship is already over. The trade is just the formality.
Now let's look at what each side actually gains from this exchange. Philadelphia acquired a 29-year-old All-NBA wing in the prime of his career. They sent out Paul George, a 9-time All-Star and one of the most decorated players of his generation, but a 36-year-old who played only 3 regular season games in 2025-26 after missing time for knee surgery and serving a 25-game suspension for violating the NBA's anti-drug policy related to what he described as improper medication. George averaged 17.3 points, 5.3 rebounds, and 3.6 assists across those 37 games, and showed legitimate effectiveness when healthy, particularly in the playoff series win over Boston. But his injury history over the past 7 seasons is a genuine and serious concern. Brown's durability, never missing more than 19 games in a season, is a transformative quality for a franchise that has watched its stars miss alarming amounts of time in recent years. Alongside Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, Brown gives Philadelphia one of the most dangerous 3-man combinations in the entire Eastern Conference. He can shoulder scoring responsibility on nights Embiid is managed carefully. He can operate as a secondary playmaker with Maxey running the primary offense. He brings elite perimeter defense and transition dynamism that this Philadelphia roster has been desperately missing. New 76ers president Mike Gansey made one of the boldest moves of the entire offseason in his first weeks on the job, and from Philadelphia's perspective, the basketball logic is nearly undeniable. They upgraded dramatically at the forward position while adding years and durability to a roster that needed both urgently. For Boston, the calculation is more layered, but no less deliberate. By moving Brown, the Celtics shed $57 million, $61 million, and $64.9 million in upcoming salary obligations, creating the flexibility they need to reset their tax status. If they stay below the tax line for the next 2 seasons, that repeater designation resets, and Boston enters the summer of 2027 positioned to spend aggressively without the brutal penalties that have strangled their roster for 2 years. Analysts estimated a clean reset would allow the Celtics to field a roster approaching $300 million for 2 consecutive seasons without catastrophic financial penalties, giving them genuine flexibility to reload around Tatum with real talent rather than minimum fillers. They received Paul George, a 9-time All-Star with 6 All-NBA nods and 4 All-Defensive Team appearances, who, when healthy, remains a legitimate 2-way contributor. They add 4 future draft picks, including 2 first-rounders, giving Stevens the capital to reshape the roster when the time comes. The Celtics also retained Derek White, Peyton Pritchard, and a developmental core that produced 56 wins and added Mitchell Robinson to address frontcourt depth. George's durability is a real concern at 36. Tatum's Achilles recovery is the central variable everything else hinges on, but Brad Stevens made a deliberate bet that long-term structural freedom was more valuable than staying locked in a financial trap inside a fractured relationship. In the new NBA environment, that may have been the only rational move available. What this trade ultimately reflects is something much bigger than one player or one team. It is a window into what the modern NBA has become and what it demands from the people running franchises in this era. The NBA's new collective bargaining agreement has permanently altered the way championship-level organizations operate. Teams that draft and develop superstars are being financially penalized for that very success. Two homegrown All-NBA players on simultaneous Supermax contracts are now as much a liability as it is an asset. One analyst described it precisely when he noted that it is maddening that Boston built a homegrown core and is essentially being punished because those players became All-NBA talents. The system is designed that way. The second apron, the repeater tax, the restrictions on trades and free agent signings, all of it is engineered to create parity. And what it actually creates in practice is a world where successful franchises are forced to dismantle the very teams they spend years assembling. The game has changed, and the decisions franchises make in this environment are no longer driven solely by basketball talent or competitive desire. They are driven by spreadsheets, by CBA rules, by tax thresholds and repeater penalties and second apron restrictions that most fans never see, but that front office executives live with every single day. The Celtics did not trade Jaylen Brown because he was bad at basketball. They traded him because the relationship had frayed, because the finances demanded a reset, and because in the new NBA, the hardest decisions are often the ones that make the most mathematical sense and the least emotional sense. So here's where everything stands right now. Jaylen Brown is heading to Philadelphia, to the franchise that eliminated him in 7 games 2 months ago, to the arena where he called their best player a flopper from a Twitch stream, and to the opportunity he has always deserved, to see what he is genuinely capable of as the unquestioned focal point of a championship-caliber roster. For the first time in his professional career, an entire NBA organization will be built specifically around him. No shared billing, no identity competition, just Jaylen Brown at the center of everything, alongside Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, with a front office that handed over 4 draft picks to acquire him. Whatever happens next in Philadelphia, Brown will finally get the answer to the question that has hovered over his entire career. What does he look like when the team is completely and unambiguously his?
Paul George is heading to Boston, where he will be counted on to help Jason Tatum lead the Celtics back toward the level they have occupied for most of this decade. The picks will accumulate, the cap space will follow, and Brad Stevens will spend the next 2 years methodically positioning this franchise for whatever window opens next. The Celtics made their choice. Jaylen Brown is moving on, and the basketball world is left processing one of the most complicated, emotionally layered, and structurally significant trades this league has produced in a very long time. So here is the question I want you to answer in the comments right now. Did the Celtics just execute the shrewdest financial reset in recent memory, a painful but necessary move that sets them up to compete for championships again in 2 years? Or did they just trade away their best and most complete player in his absolute prime, a guy who was arguably better than Tatum this season, to solve a problem that could have been managed differently? There is no easy answer. Reasonable, informed people have landed on both sides of this debate in the past 24 hours. Drop your take below, because this conversation is going to run all summer long. And if you want to stay ahead of every development as it unfolds, Tatum's return to the court, George's debut in Celtic green, and Brown's first game back at TD Garden wearing a Philadelphia 76ers jersey, make sure you are subscribed right now and hit the bell.